Will Ferrell and his meteoric rise to stardom defined mainstream comedy for almost a decade.
I'm Ron Burgundy?
Then defined the mainstream box office flop just as fast.
Oh my goodness.
He began as a Saturday Night Live darling and quickly became the most quotable comic actor of his generation.
We're going streaking!
Join us today while we talk Ron Burgundy to Buddy the Elf, and maybe even a trip to Bed Bath & Beyond.
I don't know if we'll have enough time.
This is the best and the worst of Will Ferrell. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the best and the worst. And today's episode is going to be a very, very fun one. We're talking about the anniversary of Zoolander, which has led us to the best and the worst of Will Ferrell. How's it going? I'm Andrew Ghai. Joining me, as always, is Ben Bateman. And today, this is your favorite comedic actor currently working.
My hero of all time, Chris Farley, has passed on to the comedy netherworld, and I was left with my other favorite, Will Ferrell. And I feel like it's funny because we grew up with the tail. I know you kind of feel the same way. Farley was kind of your guy too. So
yeah.
We grew up with the tail end of Farley when we were kids, and then just a few years later, Will Ferrell came on the scene. And I would be hard-pressed to name anybody else who's had the same impact in my lifetime. Maybe Jim Carrey would be the closest thing I can think of, but he owned probably the most seminal piece of my comedy brain as a teenager.
Well, yeah, it was like he came out the exact time that we were going through puberty, that we were going through middle school and high school, so he connected with us on all the levels. So before we get into Zoolander, which I cannot believe it's been 20 years?
It's a running theme, man. It's just like...
Should we talk? Is this the part where in the show where we talk about how old we are?
Yes.
No, we're not going to do that. It's been 20 years since Zoolander came out, so before we get into talk about Zoolander and then talking about Will Ferrell, Ben, what is the best way for everyone listening to support the best and the worst?
We are a brand new podcast. We're super happy to be doing this show, and if you guys want to support what we're doing, there are a couple key things to do. They mean, honestly, way more than you guys know to getting a podcast off the ground. Number one, go and leave us a rating on the podcast app. 5 stars preferably, whatever you think. If you don't like the show, leave that anyway. The more ratings we have, the better it is for the show. Leave a review. We actually are going to shout out all of the brand new reviews since last week. Later in the episode, you'll hear your name on the mic. And of course, you can find the show on YouTube as well. So go find us on Action Industries on YouTube as well. Those are the 3 things you guys can do if you want to support the show. Thank you so much for being here, and let's get back to the episode.
That's right. So now, before we talk about what the best Will Ferrell film is and what the worst Will Ferrell film is, we got to talk about a film that he was in at the very beginning of his career. Honestly, he wasn't the star of Zoolander. It was very much that Ben Stiller's movie, and even Owen Wilson, maybe a little bit more than Will Ferrell, but they were kind of like the same in my mind at that point. So when I say Zoolander to you, other than being old, what's the first thing that you think of when you hear Zoolander?
Man, it's actually kind of weird. I feel like there's so much baggage with this movie now because it came out before almost all the people in it were that famous. So I feel like all of their profiles have changed way more. So it's I think probably when I think about Zoolander now, it's Hansel is so hot right now is probably the thing that comes to mind immediately. Well, I think
it's Orange Mocha Frappuccinos.
Yeah,
one. And then what is this? The Center for Ants?
Yeah.
There's a few quotes from that movie that I feel have lived on beyond actually people that go and watch that movie. People will say that Hansel, he's so hot right now, and they've never even seen Zoolander.
Yeah,
which I think is interesting. For me, the first thing that I think of when I think Zoolander is my sister loved this movie. She thought it was hilarious. I think her and her friends saw it in the theaters, and then I watched it at home. And honestly, I don't know if maybe I was too young. I was 13 at the time, so... Or maybe it just, I didn't get it. Right?
Yeah.
Because there's movies like, MacGruber is a movie that you and I talk about a lot. I love. I feel like if I watched that movie when I was a kid, I would have thought it was funny, but not in the same way that I think it's funny now. And there's things that in Zoolander with the comic timing, kind of the awkwardness.
Yeah.
Even the moment that you and I were talking about where Mugatu and his assistants have their thing.
Yes.
As an adult, it's funnier than it was as a kid because you recognize as an adult that they really caught lightning in a bottle with that one take.
Yeah.
Right? It's so ridiculous and stupid and silly. So I think for me, when I think Zoolander, I think it reminds me of my sister.
Yeah.
And I didn't really like it when I first saw it. It was super fine to me.
I think that's the thing you point out there is maybe the most relatable piece of this, because there's some of you guys who are going to listen to this episode, and maybe you're here for the first time. Maybe you guys have found this podcast because of this anniversary, but I think Zoolander is maybe more than most movies with this group of actors. It's really stupid. And it doesn't feel like the intelligence of the humor in this movie is at the highest level. It feels like most of the jokes are, the more times you watch it, the funnier they get, but not because they're highbrow. It's just like extremely stupid. And I think movies like that in general, I tend to not like as much the first time. So, because when this movie came out, people have like revisionist history memory of this movie. This is before Old School. Yeah. So this group of actors, you know, Ben Stiller was known from an earlier time. He was known for like Something About Mary, Meet the Parents, The Ben Stiller Show. He was a 90s guy, but Will Ferrell was basically SNL. Like, Owen Wilson was like a Wes Anderson guy. Like, this wasn't a group of actors that when this movie came out, it was a big deal. Will Ferrell wasn't even a star yet.
Yeah, I mean, it really was just like, this is Ben Stiller's movie. These are other people you're going to recognize. But, like, I mean, really, when you go back and watch it, he's the least funny part of Zoolander. Like, Ben Stiller, I think, is a really interesting person because, and we're going to talk about a lot of other famous and favorite comedians as we work through the show here, but like at the beginning of the episode you were talking about like he's the guy other than maybe Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of other dudes out there. I mean, because male driven comedies were the thing. Like they just were for such a long time. So you talk about where we were at in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, and like Ben Stiller was a guy that was like, oh, he's going to be the next one. He's going to be the next big guy that we talk about, whether it's the Eddie Murphys or the Jim Carreys or the Adam Sandlers. It felt like Ben Stiller, what he was doing, I mean, he was leading in all of these comedy films. Like, he was just the guy, whether it was Starsky and Hutch or Zoolander or Meet the Parents. Like, all these movies were just, like, pushing Ben Stiller. But when you go back and watch it, he's great. He does a good job. But, like, he doesn't stand out as like, oh, wow, that guy's really, really funny. He's got something special to him. I think this is when people realize Will Ferrell had something special to him.
Because Stiller commits to his bit, but his bit is usually, it's one of a couple things. Like, if you, honestly, this is something that maybe some of you guys watching or listening don't know, is that there was one season, I referenced it a second ago, of a show called The Ben Stiller Show.
Yeah.
It was in the early 90s. It was nominated for Emmys. It got canceled, or Golden Globes or something. It got canceled after one season, but it's Ben Stiller, Janine Garofalo, Bob Odenkirk, and Andy Dick. And it's really funny.
You and I still go back and watch the Die Hard.
Die Hard 12.
He's so funny as John McClane in there.
It's really good, and there's a lot of good sketches in there. And so he was a guy who was really kind of making waves. But if you go and watch that, you'll see that there's a few things he does. The like, I'm a handsome funny guy bit is a thing that he did a lot in a lot of sketches because he was in pretty good shape, and he had kind of a square jaw, so he could do that really well. He plays the awkward straight man.
I was just going to say, he's like the evolved Chevy Chase for our generation. But in Zoolander, he's not the straight man.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he's... who is... Is there a straight man in Zoolander? Is it his wife?
It's Matilda.
Is it... Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That's his wife, in real life. Matil. Can I call you Matil?
Hey, Matil.
So, like, he definitely occupied a space where he did a few things really well, but none of them were outrageous in the same way that you can see what Will Ferrell's doing in this movie. Like, what he's doing in this movie was actually kind of a precursor to a lot of the bits that he would do later. It's a much more, as you mentioned, like PG-13 character than a lot of the kind of R-rated man-child roles that would occupy the mid-parts of the 2000s that really made him actually like a global icon.
But there were the things in this that you started to see, like, oh my God, he's so funny when his eyes are wide and when he's screaming and when he turns red. Like, he's good at being angry. He's good at being silly, right? Because when he's doing, like, the brainwashing thing, he's, like, dressed up as the little girl with the pigtails and all that. It was so just, like, it was no matter what he did, it was hilarious. Or creating the piano key necktie. Like, all of those things. Like, do you know who I am? Like... It was just this moment where I think we were like, wow, he can... It's the same thing as when we saw Farley early on in his career. It's like, I mean, we don't really get heart in this movie, which is something we do get out of Farley a lot, and we get from Will Ferrell later on. But in this movie, it was like, oh, wow, he's hitting all these comedy notes he's hitting them out of the park. Yeah. What else can he do? And so For me, Zoolander, I like it a lot. You know, another thing that we do here at the beginning of the show, especially when we talk about older movies, we talk about our fist pump moment, right?
Yeah.
And that fist pump moment is that moment when something happens in the movie, you look around, you're like, oh my God, I get to watch the rest of this movie. Are you seeing this? Are you guys actually seeing this? You want to call up your best friend and be like, hey man, what are you doing right now?
I'm cooking dinner. Can I just...
I don't care. Go
I've
to
seen
Zoolander.
Zoolander before.
Oh, have you? Have you seen it right now? This moment that I'm talking about? So when I'm watching Zoolander, or when you're watching Zoolander, is there a moment, because fist pump is usually, we did it with an action movie show, so it made more sense. Is there a fist pump moment in this, or is it like the funniest moment in the movie for you, or is there a moment that stands out that you remember better than the rest?
I think for me, I think my fist pump moment is probably just the introduction of Hansel. His whole, because Hansel shows up to the awards.
Hansel.
He's got the scooter.
The scooter's sweet.
The scooter's so sweet. And Ferrell's like, that's Hansel. He's so hot right now. Like, that line is so good.
And an attitude that says, who cares? It's only fashion.
That Hansel's so hot right now.
I hear a lot of words like beauty and handsomeness and incredibly chiseled features. To me, that's like a vanity that, self-absorption that I try to steer clear of.
Him, his looks, all the things, like the video montage when he's talking about growing up, and like it shows, it just, that stuff is so funny.
Yeah.
The entire sequence, because I think in a lot of ways, like Owen Wilson's like one of my favorite comedians ever. He's super underrated.
Yeah.
And this is key Owen Wilson. This is like exactly what he's so good at. He's Eli Cash from Tenenbaums, but he's just Hansel.
I think, I mean, I love the entrance of Hansel. I love when Zoolander walks up there and accepts the award on behalf of him because he's an idiot. It's all great. It all sets up Hansel to be kind of like, you kind of hate him.
Yeah.
But then you're like, but Zoolander's a dumbass. Right?
Yeah.
Like, why do I hate Hansel so much when Derek Zoolander's such an idiot? For me, my favorite moment, I think it will always be this, is when he goes back to his hometown. And he's in, like, Vince Vaughn is his brother.
And he's in the mines.
And he's in the mines, and he scares John Voight when he pops out. He's like, oh, God. Like, all of that is so good to me. When I was watching that, I was just like, man, they really went for just whatever they could in this movie, and it's all really damn funny. It's really stupid, but the commitment to every single character, to every single bit, no matter how dumb it was. I mean, like, why would there be a moment where he's looking at a reflection of himself in a movie that's grounded in reality? Because technically Zoolander still kind of is. People die, and he's like, who am I? He's like, I don't know. Like, just that weird shit that happens all throughout the movie.
Except
I love
for him
it.
matrixing the ninja star.
I guess that's the part that maybe is not.
You're dead to me, boy. You're more dead to me than your dead mother. I just thank the Lord she didn't live to see her son as a mermaid. Merman. Merman!
But yeah, so that's the moment that I think of. It's my favorite part because I don't know. I think the juxtaposition of John Voight and Vince Vaughn with Ben Stiller is like pretty wonderful. But they all have the black hair, you know. So they all are of the Zoolander family.
I think it's funny too. You bring up Vince Vaughn here, and I actually for a second there forgot about it because there was an article written. I can't remember the magazine exactly, but you guys can look it up. If you look up the phrase "frat pack," it was referred to in the early part of the 2000s as this group of people, and it was basically like Owen Wilson, Luke Wilson, Vince Vaughn, Will Ferrell, Ben Stiller,
Steve Carell, I think, was even in there.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, because and it's like it's kind of the group that it ends up occupying maybe about 10 of these movies. They're in a lot of each other's films. And if you look at the 90s group that's kind of similar, it's more of like the Adam Sandler, SNL adjacent group.
Spade, Farley, all
Schneider, those guys are kind
Donald,
of and it's the Happy Madison crew. So this crew, they were kind of these grown. Old School is the key movie for it because like they're just starting a fraternity and they're older.
Right.
But you even look at this and it's like Vince Vaughn is the small role in this movie. But what's weird is that didn't take off until 03, 04. This is 01. When this movie comes out, we all watch it. We don't really realize this group of actors, for the most part, is going to be kind of occupying the next decade of comedy, and they're going to own comedy for most of what becomes the next decade.
Yeah.
It kind of flew under the radar, and these guys all ended up working together so much more.
What did you notice this time when you watched Zoolander? Like, what stood out to you?
I think probably the big thing, you alluded to it a second ago, but I don't find Ben Stiller to be very funny, and I don't think that he's specifically unfunny. Right. It's just that like most of what he does in this movie is like roll your eyes. It's kind of dumb. And I kind of found that all the other characters are more likable, but I also recognize that if he's more likable, then the movie's worse.
Right, and that's why I felt like he was like an evolved Chevy Chase, because you go back and you watch all the vacation movies or all the movies that made Chevy Chase funny, and he's good in them, but he's usually not the funniest part. It's usually things happening to him or situations that he's put into or people that he has to interact with.
Yeah.
And his reaction is you as the audience. It's not exactly that with Zoolander, but I agree. I think just in general, Owen Wilson is funnier. I mean, Mugatu, Will Ferrell is exponentially funnier, but you do need Stiller to be who he is in there, which is not really the straight man, but like kind of the butt of the joke.
He has to, it's like he has to commit to this sort of embarrassing character, and he has to commit the whole movie. He can never really let up.
You Googleizer?
Yeah, and right.
Some of it's
There's
pretty
some
good.
it's really funny. I mean, I mentioned the line when he's at the funeral, and I was like watching, and I was like, this is so dumb. When he's talking about his model friends who all died, he's like, they were my brothers, but not like my real brothers, like the way black people use it, which I think is more meaningful.
Right, you're like, huh.
And you're like, is that line inappropriate? I'm not really sure. It's like, but this character would definitely say it, so
Right,
it kind of,
right, because it's so on the nose. It's like, God, Derek, just shut up.
Yeah.
So it still feels like it's aged appropriately, but you wonder if that joke would maybe be in the movie now. And I think it would. I think if Zoolander was made now, it would. What I noticed this time when I was watching it was just like, there's something so beautiful about actors at the beginning of their careers.
Yeah.
And what it is, and it's not like the very beginning, obviously. We've talked about the movies that all these guys have been in, but it's like as they're on their way up to superstardom, it's like when you watch athletes in playoff season, right? They just kick it into another gear. The level of commitment in Zoolander all the way across the board, from Jerry Stiller to Will Ferrell, to his assistant, whose name is escaping me at the moment, to Billy Zane, to David Bowie,
Yes.
to Owen Wilson. Just everyone is so all in. Mila Jovovich,
Yes.
like every one of these actors and actresses is so dialed in and so committed to how stupid everything needs to be, which is like, you know, people made careers out, like Leslie Nielsen and Lloyd Bridges made careers out of just like saying absurd stuff with a straight face.
Yeah.
And that's like what this movie is, I think, under a microscope.
I think probably because I mentioned the Hansel introduction as a fist pump for me. I think the other thing that stands out is you just talked about it. It's the group of actors at the walk-off. That whole scene,
Right.
They all storm out of the party, and he's like, "It's a walk-off, Matilda. Do you want to see what the real modeling scene is like?" And they like get there, and it's everything.
Put a cork in it, Zane.
Yeah, all the different people, like the Billy Zane part. Listen to your friend Billy Zane. He's a cool dude. David Bowie being there. It's so perfectly scripted. I mean, the fact that Donald Trump endorses Zoolander to start this movie.
I mean, so many famous people endorse him at the beginning of this
Fred
movie.
Durst,
Natalie
Lance
Portman
Bass.
talks about wanting to date him. Like, it's so good because they got, and that was the other thing, is it felt like going back in time.
Yeah.
When you watch this movie, you're like, man, everyone just wanted to be a part of something that looked like fun.
Fred Durst was not the butt of the joke. He's just in the movie.
He's just in the movie
as a famous person.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of what I noticed is like, and we're going to talk about it when we get into Ferrell a bit more. It's just like the level of commitment, and I think another part of it that maybe is not giving them their the justice to the actors is maybe also everything was still so fresh.
Yeah.
Right? Like this side of Ferrell was still so fresh. Maybe he still tries just as hard in 2018 or when he's making movies as he did back in 2001, but we've just seen it for 17 more years. So we'll get into that in a second. Let's talk just a little bit more about our thesis statement. That's right. We have a big, bold thought about whatever the topic is. It usually is taking from the anniversary film, and then this thesis statement gets to kind of bridge the gap between that and our topic of the show today. And I'm going to let you take this one because, again, it's a really special one to you, just like Fincher was. What is our thesis statement on Will Ferrell?
We try to kind of root these almost like in hyperbole. We want it to be a big thought, not just like a soft opinion. And I think
Will Ferrell's funny.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really interesting about the conversation surrounding Will Ferrell, anybody who's a fan or anybody who's a critic of Will Ferrell will agree the same thing, which is that there was a period of time in the 2000s when he was the guy, like a lot of comedians are. And though he tailed off a bit, especially in the last 10 years, he is still the definitive film actor in comedy of the last 20 years. Of this century, Will Ferrell is the guy. Of the 21st century, there is not a more prominent comic actor in film. And it's because of a lot of things. It's because of box office. It's because of breadth of career, how many movies he's done.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask me, and we're going to get to it later in the episode when we talk about his best movie, I can tell you guys, I promise, the conversation surrounding what his best movie is, even a top 3, is extremely hard to have.
Yeah.
You are going to leave out some true classics, movies that would offend people if they're not even in the top 3.
Yeah, because he's generational.
Yeah.
Right? He did things in the early 2000s and the mid 2000s, and then he's done things in the 2010s that also stuck with you. So it's really interesting when you talk about his career. I agree, which is why it's our thesis statement, that he's the definitive comic actor of the 21st century. There's other people that come into this conversation, though, right? Like, Ben Stiller is one of them. He's one of the guys we talked about. Seth Rogen, Steve Carell is another guy we mentioned.
Melissa McCarthy.
Yeah, Zach Galifianakis. All of these people have great comedic runs, but it does feel like, because we're not mentioning Jim Carrey and Adam Sandler and Chris Farley for reasons. They all are right before this. They're really 90s people.
The key part of their careers, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think I have to agree, because when you look at everyone else on that list, the people that we just mentioned, Rogen, Stiller, Carell, Galifianakis, and McCarthy, Galifianakis and McCarthy, I feel like, are still a little young, like, in their careers, even though they've been around for a while. I mean, it feels weird to say that because it's already been so long, but, like, we're talking about Will Ferrell joining SNL. That was back in 95, right? It's like our whole lives almost that we've been watching him be funny.
I also think if you're going to try to use the same example of, like, how many impactful movies are there that are truly classics? And if you look at, like, let's take McCarthy, for instance, in a comedy genre, you've got Bridesmaids and you've got Spy.
I knew you were going to say Spy.
Well,
because we love Spy so much.
Well, it's really funny.
Yeah, it is very funny.
And I think if you look at all the rest of the comedies she did during that run, maybe, like, Identity, it's not that funny. I've seen it. Like,
well, I think one of the biggest problems, too, is that, like, when you get as famous as a lot of these people are, they can just do whatever the hell they want. And she worked with her husband a lot. And I have to admit, as much as I like the two of them, and I like the two of them on camera together usually, I don't think that they should be making movies, like, leaning on each other for just, like, the creative inspiration the whole time.
Yeah, well, because I think you can say, like, with her, the point with Ferrell is that I'm going to name 5 movies and you're going to put gun to my head which one doesn't make a top 5. It's difficult. With her, there's maybe 2 that are really significant. With Kevin Hart, there's maybe 2 that are significant. With Galifianakis, he has the Hangover franchise, like, one other movie. That's kind of...
Yeah, I mean, it really does feel like it was just... Alan in The Hangover was, like, his perfect... like the climax of his career, everything kind of coming together the right time. Everyone was into that kind of humor. The movie came out at the appropriate time to where some of the humor in there would still fly, whereas nowadays it might not be as funny. And then Steve Carell's a really interesting guy because he's done so much other stuff in his career, right? Like, Will Ferrell, I don't think can do Foxcatcher.
No.
Right? Like, it wouldn't, like, seeing Will Ferrell in those prosthetics and acting kind of weird and creepy, you would just try to convince yourself the whole time it was funny.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're watching Steve Carell do that, like, Steve Carell feels much more of just, like Will Ferrell is a comedic actor. Steve Carell just feels like an actor.
Yeah, I think if you were going to take Rogen and Carell, they're probably the 2 that I would say have the closest to like the number of hits or like movies that I really think are classics. Because you can talk Knocked Up and you can talk Pineapple Express, like Superbad, you know. But again, he's not the star of Superbad, so it's like if you throw
what's
in.
Interesting about a lot of those movies you're mentioning is like how many of those movies is Seth Rogen just the straight up lean on you as the star? Because even in Knocked Up, Heigl was more famous than he was at the time, right?
And if you're going to talk about cameos and you're going to talk about supporting roles, Ferrell runs laps at that point.
Yeah.
If you're going to include movies where he's not the star, he's got 15. Like, that's almost his bread and butter.
Yeah, you have to, I think when you're talking about the most famous or the most impactful or the definitive comedic actor of the time, it's like you look at Jim Carrey and you look at Adam Sandler and you look at what they did when they were hot, or you look at Chevy Chase, you look at Eddie Murphy, like they just have this run of just like, put them in a movie and that's it. Put them in a movie with another superstar, it's gonna sell tickets. And like Rogen has done a good amount of that, but he doesn't have like Will Ferrell's run of just like, I'm the guy, just doing whatever I want. Seth Rogen feels like he's more of a role player, which is maybe why his career has been more successful. It's hard to say.
Because they both leaned into producing and writing roles in the end. I think they probably both I mean, because here's
Will Ferrell's more famous, but it almost feels like Seth Rogen's more successful.
Like, we're going to talk about, Will Ferrell and sort of where he was at the time the Zoolander came out in a second. But if you even just look at his 03-04, it's literally just Elf, Old School, Anchorman.
Yeah.
That's a 3 in a row. That's like, and it's Zoolander before that. It's 4 in a row. It's an insane stretch where if you look at his career, it's just nobody's really keeping up. And that's why he became America's darling comedy guy for a while.
So what the hell makes this dude so funny? Why is he the guy? Why is he the one of one funniest guy of the 21st century? Like, what is it?
Okay, so I think there's a few things. Number one, you mentioned it earlier when talking about Zoolander. His commitment is off the charts.
Yes.
Like, it's absolutely off the charts. And I think, we can talk about sort of how we perceived Will Ferrell and the different things that made him stand out to us. Because I can remember specifically the SNL Blue Oyster Cult I Need More Cowbell sketch.
Yeah.
And he's in the tight shirt with his belly poking out.
Yep.
He's got the glasses and the hair. He's got the cowbell. When he's doing the look at Jimmy Fallon, or it's not Jimmy Fallon.
Fallon.
I think it's Chris Parnell.
Yeah.
And he's staring at him, and he's like, he just commits so hard. It's like,
But I'd be doing myself a disservice and every member of this band if I didn't perform the hell out of this.
Guess what? I got a fever. And the only prescription is more cowbell.
Thank you, Bruce.
that or in Old School when he's like doing the baton routine.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
like his commitment.
And you know that that's just him
Yeah.
living in the space as an actor in the zone, right? It's not like, okay, now you're going to look at Parnell and bang it slowly. And then now you're going to twirl and fall. Like, I'm sure some of that might be in there because, I mean, let's be honest, Todd Phillips is hilarious.
Yeah.
But, like, a lot of it is just Will Ferrell being put in a scenario to be hilarious.
Yeah.
Like, do what you're the best at. I mean, I think what's so really another great thing that Will Ferrell has done is a guy that, you and I did improv with for years in Joey Greer.
Yeah.
And I always thought it was fascinating because Farley has this too. I think people that are inherently hilarious can play offensively angry and it makes you laugh.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you watch Farley get upset, when you watch Ferrell get upset, there's something hilarious about it. And I think that his commitment to being angry while knowing he looks like a jackass is just, it's comedic genius. I think you add in the physical humor with him being okay with like being the butt of the joke physically, right? Like they didn't need him to do that in the Blue Oyster Cult sketch.
Right.
But he was like, but what if my stomach was just hanging out?
Well, I think
know?
I think I said this on one of our shows when we were talking about this idea. I actually think one of the single most unique parts of Will Ferrell is the fact that a lot of physical comedians are real big. They're very heavy actors. You saw it with John Candy, you saw Chris Farley, Melissa McCarthy. They really use their size and they swing it around and it makes us laugh. Ferrell's a big guy. He's not in shape technically, but he's not like a big guy.
Yeah.
He just has this like tire and he really uses it. It's
Old school.
You
Right?
know, old school.
We're going streaking.
When he runs around and you like see his stomach, he's out of shape.
You see him ass naked from behind, and it's just a joke. And then they make fun of him it being cold out there. Like everything just because you look at him and you just want to laugh.
And it works. It works in so many roles. It works when he plays Chaz Michael and he's in like spandex.
Right.
It works in like so many different situations perfectly. He was never an actor who gained 40, 50 pounds. He stayed kind of that size his whole career.
And like I think the other thing, and I don't know, I hope I put this right. I put this in an unoffensive way. Is like he just looks like a loser. Like that's why he plays Chaz. That's why he plays the 40-year-old kid at home.
Yeah.
Like right, he just kind of looks like what you wouldn't want your 40-year-old son to look like. But he leans into it. Like what? Mom, the meatloaf. Like you look at him, he's got like a hairnet on. He's wearing like a robe. Like all of these things about Ferrell is just that like he completely understands his tool as an actor and uses every piece of it. And it's always just golden.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
most of the time.
Yeah, I mean the best moments when he's using that stuff to his advantage. Incredible. You mentioned the thing about getting unnaturally angry. He has things he goes back to movie after movie. We've worked too hard. We got to keep our composure in Old School. He uses that same line in other things. There are, and we know this because we've worked with plenty of comedians that they have their bag of tricks they go back to.
Yeah.
His bag of tricks, just like Farley, was so refined. It was so on the nose, so sort of perfect. He could bring it up in all these different moments. I think another thing with Ferrell that really stands out to me is that he plays a really good like deadpan.
Yeah,
like he does a really good like.
I mean, that's what he's so good at in the other guys.
Yeah,
is being so deadpan the whole time, but saying ridiculous things or responding in ridiculous ways.
Yeah, I mean, there's that one moment that I always talk about with the lemonade when he's like, and he says that thing to the other guys, and he's like, "You've done things with my wife," and he gives him that look, and it's just like he's playing it so straight, but it's so funny.
Yeah, the facial expressions and the reactions that he also gives are you almost forget about him because he is so big a lot of the time that some of the best things are just like, I mean, still one of my favorite lines in Step Brothers is that's a truly funny observation. It's just there's something about it, the way he plays it, it's kind of awkward. So, you know, who was Will Ferrell to you at the time that Zoolander comes out? You know, we just gushed about, you know, why we think he's so great, but in 2001, who was it?
Well,
at least to you.
We liked in my family SNL, but we didn't really watch it. We watched a lot of the best of tapes. That was the thing we had in our household. And I didn't love young Will Ferrell like in the same way that I became a fan later. I found a lot of his early gimmick that he would do, and a lot of it is like the stuff you'd see him in Superstar, the cheerleader sketches. You'd see him like in Elf, like that really big, bright-eyed energy.
Right.
You know? I liked when he became the frat pack man-child guy more, the R-rated guy. It just started, it was funnier to me. So I even like Roxbury, which I had seen, I think probably in 01, I had seen Roxbury, I had seen stuff like Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. I'd seen these movies, but he never stood out as like the funniest. I think the Blue Oyster Cult sketch and Celebrity Jeopardy were probably the two things that at the time I had watched a lot of, and I really loved both of those.
Yeah, I loved Celebrity Jeopardy, but I loved Harry Carey. I loved the Spartans, the cheerleaders. I loved him and Rachel Dratch being lovers in the hot tub. Like, I loved SNL. I watched it every single week. It was like, because, you know, we've talked about this before. I grew up in a pretty religious family, and we were pretty conservative in like what we watched growing up. And SNL was kind of like the raunchiest thing I got to watch. So I loved watching it weekly. And, you know, again, when I talk about my sister, like, Night at the Roxbury was a movie that I adored. But this wasn't the guy that I fell in love with now, right? That was very much the PG-13 SNL version of him. And as I got older, it almost felt like he got a little raunchier, right? Like, even though Anchorman's PG-13, like, I still remember him standing there with the erection with Veronica Corningstone. It was just like the perfect time. I was thinking it was
the pleats of the pants.
Yeah, the pleats. Like, I fell out of my chair laughing at that. But it was also because of what we talked about at the beginning of the show. He came up at the perfect time that we were growing up. He grew up with us.
I mean, we're 33 years old. We're talking about a movie that's 20 years ago. We were 13 when this movie came out. Right? There's like, when you talk about even old school, I mean, I think I laughed harder at Old School in a theater than I had almost ever laughed in a movie. Like, Old School and Tommy Boy are like the two memories that I have of like, just, I could not control myself. I was convulsing with laughter.
Yeah, that was me with Anchorman in the theater. And so, yeah, I mean, that's who Will Ferrell was to us. I didn't know that he was going to be Will Ferrell yet. I didn't know, because the other thing too that's really interesting is when you look at guys or girls that came from SNL. I think Molly Shannon's a great example. I think Chris Kattan's a great example. You didn't know how good they were really going to be. Were they going to be the next Sparley? I'm having a stroke.
You're doing
here.
well.
Were they going to be the next Farley or Spade? Were they going to be the next Chase or Martin, the next Carvey? Or are they going to be the next, like, Kattan or Guestire or Molly Shannon or Rachel Dratch, who, like, or even Tim Meadows, right?
I mean, statistics will tell you that even if they're hilarious and they get nominated for Emmys for guest star on SNL every year, like, most of the time they're not going to be famous. You even look at the guys who like some of these guys from the last generation that had an enormous impact. You look at Bill Hader.
Yeah.
Bill Hader is really funny, and he's had a pretty good movie and television career, but he's no Mike Myers. He didn't become a global icon. Like, he's one of the best of his generation, like probably one of the single best of the last 10 years. Will Forte, great guy, hilarious actor.
Right.
But like, to go and have the kind of career that Ferrell had is really rare. Very, very rarely do they break past the supporting actor in comedies, voice on a television show, maybe their voice in a couple animated movies type of mold.
So Will Ferrell, in 2001, he was 34 years old. He'd been on 6 seasons of SNL so far. He had 1 left, and it makes sense because this really was the time when it was like, you know, you see it in movies, you read about it in the papers. It's like, this is the moment where he was like breaking through to superstardom. And usually what happens is when they do that, they start to leave SNL, right? You got to move to that next level. That's the whole point. And so at this point, Roxbury was the only movie he'd ever starred in. And it was very much, I mean, it's from an SNL sketch. It was like, all right, so he could do the same thing he did on SNL, but for an hour and a half. The year before this, he'd married Vivica Paulin, who he's still married to now. I think they have a couple kids together. And, you know, if you listen to Ferrell talk about this time in his life, maybe a few years before this, like, he was really still going for it. He was doing absolutely everything that he could. He was a guy that, like, all he ever wanted to do was make people laugh, and it seems like he was finally getting his chance here. This was the moment. 2001 in Zoolander was the moment, it feels like, right before he became a true superstar.
Yeah, the path is really interesting with these guys, the ones who do make it into movies, because you can actually follow a pretty predictable trajectory, and it's usually that they make an impact on the show, they get a few supporting roles in comedy adjacent movies. So like use Farley as the example. You know, he shows up in Airheads, Coneheads, Wayne's World, and then he gets Tommy Boy. But it's the few years before that where he's starting to show up and people are like, oh, this guy's really good. Then you get your movie. So with Ferrell, he's showing up in the movies we're talking about. He's in Superstar. He's in Night at the Roxbury. Yep. He gets his breakout in 01 with this movie. Doesn't do a movie in 02. And then all of a sudden in 03, he has this crossroads moment because he gets 2 movies, and they're 2 of his most famous. He gets Old School, R-rated, raunchy comedy.
Yep.
He gets Elf, the supremely children-facing Christmas movie. He could have done either one.
And the fact that he does both immediately made him approachable to everyone.
Everybody.
That was the thing. That was the thing that was so crazy about it, and that was the thing that a lot of these other guys did not do, or at least didn't do as well as he did. I mean, Carrey did, right?
Yeah.
Carrey did this because he did the same thing with, like, I mean, his movies weren't quite as raunchy. He liked to stick in the PG-13 range because R-rated comedies just weren't as popular. But he also did How the Grinch Stole Christmas, right?
Yeah.
He found a way to really adore himself to young audiences and old audiences, which made it so that parents and people choosing who would watch movies could never just shut Will Ferrell out. He was going to be a part of the entertainment zeitgeist for a long time.
You could say that similarly, like Jim Carrey, like I would say maybe Dumb and Dumber is the most racy and like The Mask is the least of his first movies,
Right.
but they're still all kind of right in the center. Whereas like, you know, Old School is pretty raunchy.
Yeah, I mean, that's
pretty
just straight up R-rated
R-rated
comedy that you would like.
There's nudity in the movie.
Yeah, and it so God, I love Old School. All right, so now that we figured out who Ferrell is to you and me, to who he is to the rest of the world, we've talked about Zoolander, so now we got to get into the best and the worst of Will Ferrell. But before we do that, there's a couple things that you guys can do to get involved with the conversation that we are having.
Yeah, you know, we've posted this podcast now for the last several weeks. The comments you guys have been leaving have been awesome, but we want to be able to interact with you guys. So number one, if you're watching this episode right now, if it's on YouTube, a couple things, hit the thumbs up button, leave your thoughts below in the comments. What do you think is the best Will Ferrell movie? What is the single best? What's the worst? We're going to talk to you guys here in just a second about what the rated best and worst movies are before we make our decisions. The other thing is, if you're listening to this on audio, go ahead and screenshot or tweet at us anything. Tag us on Instagram. Literally anything. Anything and anywhere. Start a conversation. We've been able to interact with a lot of you guys these last few weeks, and it makes the conversation so much more fun for us to be able to say, yeah, about 20 or 30 you guys have the opinion of this one, and some of you guys like this one, and it really does feel like we're building a community here. So if you're listening to this right now, we encourage you, tweet at us right now, leave a comment right now. Let's get that conversation going.
And maybe you don't want to talk about Will Ferrell. That's totally fine. Maybe you didn't want to talk about Fincher. Well, next week on The Best and the Worst, we're going to be talking about the best and the worst of Denzel Washington. So maybe you want to talk about Ferrell, maybe you wanted to talk about Fincher, but you can definitely talk to us about Denzel in the future. So let us know in any way that you'd like, whether it's on Twitter, Instagram, or on YouTube. Let's get back to the conversation here. The first thing that we need to do when talking about the best and the worst is talk about things that are not eligible, because there's a lot of, you mentioned his cameos.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to have any of his cameos because they're not Will Ferrell movies.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that Will Ferrell, he's in so many movies. This is crazy.
So many movies.
He's had a huge career. So, I mean, I think the cameos are a big one. You know, we're only going to ultimately decide on one best and one worst. And so you can't put in movies that he just has one great scene. So though we all absolutely adore The Wedding Crashers, it's a phenomenal scene.
We do.
You know, and him and Starsky and Hutch, those are great. Those are not going to qualify. I think additionally, one of the great strengths we talked about with Will Ferrell that makes him so good is his physical comedy.
Yes, which is why, because it's crazy. So I went and watched it like so many of his movies over the last week. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like I watched probably 90% of his entire catalog.
Really?
now. Yeah, like legitimately. Every day, all day long. And what I realized when watching his animated movies was that, like, they're fine.
Yeah.
But they rely solely on the writing and the writing to be hilarious. Right? So, like, when you look at Lego Movie, when you look at Megamind, like, they're good. They're
Yeah.
fine. They're enjoyable. Lego Movie, I think, more than Megamind. But, like, other than hearing Will Ferrell's voice and hear him say things kind of funny, because that's kind of the whole gag in Megamind is he, like, pronounces words wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I can't even, like, Metrocity instead of Metro City.
Sure.
Right? And he does that, like, throughout the movie with different words. Like, you don't get to see his face, and you don't get to see that either whether it's the bright-eyed look in his face, the angriness on his face, whatever it is, and the physical humor. It's all not there. It's just his voice. While I think some people can really pull that off, I think that you miss, like, I don't want to see Jim Carrey voicing things in the 90s. I want to see him acting absurd and using all of his body to make me laugh. Even now, it's still the same thing with Ferrell. I think he's just so much better. Even if he's just got a dumb wig on, it's still that, like, right? It's just, like, it just makes you laugh because you see him as, like, Jackie Moon. Wait, no, yeah, that's his name?
Jackie Moon. Yeah, I think the reason I agree with you so much is, like, I can remember in the peak of Will Ferrell's career when I was, like, the obsessed, like, the biggest fan in the world, and I remember I was living in LA. It was 06. It was early 06, I think. And I was going to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and Curious George came out. And I was excited because, like, you know, I read it as a kid, but, like, I just love Will Ferrell. So I went and saw Curious George, and he plays the man in the yellow hat, the voice. And I'm like, it's just not special at all. Like, he's totally fine in it.
Right.
But it does not at all feel like I wanted, like, something. And I realized that it was disappointing because I just didn't get to see or have that experience with him. So his voice roles, despite the fact that they're really great, they're not going to make it, nor will the cameos. Something like Zoolander does qualify because he is a starring supporting role. So I think that's the cutoff for us.
Right, because Zoolander opens on him.
Yeah.
Right? He's clearly the bad guy of the movie. He's in, I'd say he's probably close to in half of that movie.
Yeah.
Whereas all the other movies that we're talking about, like Wedding Crashers, like Austin Powers, we're just not going to, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, they're not going to be in there. Neither are the animated films because, at least in our opinions, they're not the funniest things that are out there. So the three best. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I need to stop you real quick here.
Yes.
There's a couple movies that we are not going to get a chance to talk about.
Okay.
We mentioned Wedding Crashers. Starsky and Hutch is very funny. Obviously, the early roles in Austin Powers are impactful. But there's one.
So good.
I want to throw this out there for anybody that doesn't know this movie exists, because most people don't. It's a movie starring Luke Wilson called The Wendell Baker Story. And I might have had a theatrical release, but I know you can still rent it. It's written by the Wilson brothers, Andrew, I think, and Owen. It might have been Luke. All three of them wrote it together.
Okay.
But it's got...
Who the hell is Andrew Wilson?
He used to come into the library all the time.
Really?
You'd recognize him, yeah.
Huh.
My
bad.
He's like, you know, Luke Wilson is kind of like a hotshot character in this movie. He, like, leaves town, and he comes back, and his ex-girlfriend, who's played by Eva Mendes, she's now dating the owner of the local grocery store, who's played by Will Ferrell. And so Luke Wilson's like running around town, like stalking her, trying to get her back. And there's this like one hilarious scene where Will Ferrell socks him in the face in a grocery store. And it's just, if you look it up on YouTube, guys, it's Will Ferrell cottage cheese. If you look that up, we'll probably throw it in here. If you're listening, you'll get to hear it here. But you know, if you're watching on video or something like that, you want to go watch it right now. I recommend it. It's very funny.
Say, where's the cottage cheese at?
Cottage cheese?
Yeah.
Just right down over.
Tell me if you don't stock it.
You're Wendell Baker, aren't you? You're a real character, aren't you? God, you're a real character.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I will need to watch the clip. So, according to Rotten Tomatoes, which is what we like to use, and this is the tomato meter, not the audience, the three best Ferrell movies are Elf, The Other Guys, and Anchorman 2, The Legend Continues, with scores respectively at 85, 78, and 75%. And then the three worst Ferrell movies.
Three worst are The House at 20%. Second place, A Night at the Roxbury, that's third. Second, which is 11% for that. That's kind of surprising. And then the worst rated film, the number one worst rated at 10%, is Holmes and Watson. Honestly, are you shocked that Roxbury has 11%?
I'm actually really shocked because if you look at the IMDb scores, The House has 5.6, Holmes and Watson has 3.8, but A Night at the Roxbury has 6.2. It does feel crazy that the scores are that radically different, especially because when you talk about the tomato meter, it's literally just yes or no.
Yeah.
It's not a score. So that means out of 100 people, only 11 of them said that they wanted to watch or enjoyed watching A Night at the Roxbury.
Well, and conversely, if you look at the IMDb scores here, the third best rated film on Tomatoes, Anchorman 2, has a 6.3, while Roxbury on IMDb has a 6.2. They're a little percentage point off. I think probably actually the single most shocking thing of both lists is that Anchorman 2 is the third highest rated film.
Yeah, that's definitely a big surprise there. I think the other thing that's crazy, and this is just an aside, is like after doing this show for a month now, the Rotten Tomatoes audience, tomato meter, and then IMDb numbers could not be more all over the place all of the time. Like, unless it's like The Godfather, it's just a crazy just difference in numbers and scores. So we're not going to use those scores. We're going to use a system of science, movie science that you and I have developed. We originally talked about it as approachability, visibility, and rewatchability. And then there's another part of it which is execution versus expectation. We've changed up the titles a little bit, but we're still basically coming back to the exact same thing. And the first thing we're going to start off with is rewatchability. The once-a-year movie versus the never-again movie. With Will Ferrell, what is your once-a-year movie?
You know, with this category, what I find happens is this is the closest to favorite. This is kind of because it's the movie you come back to the most. Mm-hmm. And what I've noticed with Will Ferrell,
and it's important you say that because we are trying to figure out the best and the worst, not our favorite.
Personal favorites, yeah. You know, he's got a lot of movies that I love, and I think of all of the ones that are in the sort of top tier for me, they all will make me laugh if I watch them once a year, but I do find the one that I come back to the most consistently is The Other Guys. We've been talking about it for years. I saw this in theaters. I didn't even think it was that funny the first time. I thought it was just okay in theaters. And then over the years, the more I watched it, I think that this movie is more chock full of joke after joke after joke than almost any movie he's ever done. It feels like top to bottom, it's just loaded with jokes. Yeah,
the jokes are great in it. Him and Wahlberg play off each other really, really well. And I think it's really smart, right? Like, that's the thing about Adam McKay is, like, you know, he also did Step Brothers. So it's a thing that you can look at and talk about is, like, I think The Other Guys, while there are kind of dumb parts in it, it's a really smart movie. And it's about a much bigger issue that is a real issue in the world, right? And there's a reason why he did The Big Short. But when you look at Step Brothers, it's just dumb, but it's still hilarious because it's intelligent jokes. And it's like, they don't have to, it's not like lowbrow humor. It's still kind of dumb, but you have to have great execution. You have to have great comic timing. And like the two of them, I just feel like they're firing on all cylinders, which is why it's not even just the two of them, even Catherine Hahn and Adam, what's his name?
Adam Scott.
God, they're all, and Richard Jenkins, Mary Steenburgen.
Yeah,
the whole cast
Rob
is incredible.
Riggle.
Right? Yeah. Pow! What are you saying, pow? Step Brothers is my once-a-year movie. I love it. I watched it again this last week to do a study up for Ferrell. I was laughing my ass off the whole time. And it's funny because, like, you can't exactly quantify what it is that they catch in that movie, but it's just perfect. The jokes all the way throughout, they're hilarious. They get just raunchy enough, but they keep it just intelligent enough. And him and John C. Reilly playing off each other is the best it's ever been. Way more than Talladega Nights, in my opinion.
I mean, there's that great moment in Ted Lasso season 1 where they're on the field, and he's like, did anybody find that funny? And he's like, I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. He's like, until now, I thought the Step Brothers bunk bed scene was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, but this is actually funnier than that.
And like the Step Brothers scene, the bunk bed scene is hilarious.
It's so good.
You know, like you see it coming from a mile away, and like, God, the question, like what they say in the moment. Do you remember what they say right when he jumps on the bed? He goes, "Yeah, I never asked you. Do you like guacamole?" And then the bed collapses. It's like, why is that funny? Why? It's just hilarious. And I don't know. I feel like they all got together and just figured out the most hilarious thing that could happen at any moment, and they do it through the entire movie. even just calling him Dragon, like, it's just so dumb.
Hey, I never asked you. Yeah. You like guacamole? Oh God! Run!
There's a lot of great jokes in Step Brothers. I would argue, yeah, if for me it's close. Like there's a close group of movies that for me would be the most rewatchable, and Step Brothers is close to the top. But for me, I do have to lean into the other guys. Now, how about the Never Again film? Because he's got a lot of really bad ones.
Dr. Dobek, you call me Robert. Thank Robin.
Thank you, Robin. Look in your hand. Look in your hand.
Left hand.
So. Thanks, Dobek.
And then like the hug that they always do. Okay, so yeah, I need to stop. What's the Never Again movie for you? The movie that you wish you could unsee from Will Ferrell?
You know, I hate to say it. I think almost everything he's done in the last 10 years is basically this movie. Like, they're almost all that way. There's only a couple I can think of, and they're mostly not ones that star him. It's like the Lego movies are great, but most of the ones that he's actually been the lead in are pretty terrible. But for me, it's not even really close. There's only one that I just didn't laugh. I think there's a single scene in this entire movie that I laughed one time, and it's Holmes and Watson, and it's the scene when he eats the raw onion like an apple. I thought that was very funny.
And like John C. Reilly's trying to eat it as well, and he's like just gagging the whole time.
Yeah, that's really funny. But aside from that, like I think Holmes and Watson is almost unwatchable.
It feels like when you watch Holmes and Watson, it would be like if they were filming a Step Brothers that was like a period piece, and they used only the bad cuts.
Yeah.
They used only the unfunny jokes, or like the really. That's why I say like in Step Brothers, it feels dumb but still intelligent. Like they had to like get that comic timing down perfectly. They had to figure out just like why guacamole instead of cheese dip, right? There's just something funnier about it. Whereas in Holmes and Watson, it feels like they didn't ever take that extra step. It was just like dick and fart jokes, right? Like that's what it felt like, even if that's not exactly what it was. And like even, you know, Lauren Lapkus, who plays like the mute in that movie that Will Ferrell falls in love with, like it's just kind of tired. It's just not that funny. We've seen that person before. We've seen that whole thing before where like some smart person falls in love with like, you know, what's the like the Frankenstein assistant's character? Do you know what I'm talking
about? Inga you're talking about?
Or I can't, like Igor, I can't remember. But it's just like we've seen that thing happen.
Yeah.
And it's just none of it felt fresh. None of it felt that funny. And I think for me, honestly, I feel the same way about Get Hard.
Oh, yeah, that's another one that was tough. That's like it's another one I think I've watched. In fact, almost every bad movie that he's done, I've watched on an airplane.
Right.
I definitely watched both of those on airplanes, and they were both just like.
Because, you know, the other thing that we don't break down with like your pick and my pick is the expectation versus execution.
Yeah.
And like with both of these movies, they had high expectation.
Yeah,
right?
they did.
Ferrell and Riley together again. Hart and Ferrell together for the first time. And they're both just kind of bad. There are a couple redeeming moments in Get Hard, but in general, like
I'm a fan of the prison yard scene. I think it's funny.
it is pretty funny when Hart pulls the out of his face, pulls it down under his eyes. Yeah, but it also feels like it goes on a little too long.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think is really interesting about Get Hard is like, who's supposed to be the funnier person in that movie?
Yeah.
Whereas like
fair.
it felt like Ferrell and Riley and Talladega and Step Brothers were working together, and like Sacha Baron Cohen and Talladega, they're all working together to make this hilarious product. Where in like Get Hard, even though I don't think there was an ego thing at all, it was just like, all right, who's going to be the funnier one in this scene instead of how can this scene be the funniest?
Yeah, well, he definitely leaned into a part of his career later where he started playing the straight man more and more.
Yeah.
You actually can see it in like Daddy's Home 2, kind of The House in some ways, definitely Get Hard. He plays like kind of this like soft straight guy. And he does it a lot. And if like it doesn't really work unless it's exactly perfect. Like it works really well on the other guys because he, as you mentioned, they keep trading off who's funnier.
Yeah.
Like he gets to have the Gator moments. He gets to have all those moments, and they're really funny. But then the moments when he's the straight guy are also great,
right? Like the whole lions in the water thing.
That's amazing.
It's like one of my favorite monologues in his career. What are the two animals?
A tuna.
A tuna and a lion. Yeah.
First of all, a lion in the ocean? I'm assuming it's the coast of South Africa.
Because it's all delivered perfect. Like it's smart.
We've established a beachhead. How are you gonna breathe? We have a breathing apparatus using kelp. Can't breathe for a long time, but an hour 45, no problem. She'll give us enough time to hunt you and your pride, and then he throws coffee on him. Like it's just incredible.
It's all so good. But again, that's Adam McKay way of being funny, right? Those
Yeah.
things that joke took a lot of layers, like off the coast of South Africa.
Yeah.
That goes into real research, right? That's real intelligence.
There's a great you can find it online, I'm sure, but I got to interview Rob Hubel about that movie once, and I talked to him about the soup kitchen monologue.
Yeah.
And he's telling me, he's like, that's Adam McKay. He's like, you'll be doing the scene and you'll do your lines. He'll just keep it rolling, and he'll just be like, hey, what else would you find in the back of a Prius?
Right.
What else would you find back there? Just keep going. Just say it again.
And like Will Ferrell's really good at that because he does it in the interview scenes in Step Brothers.
Yeah.
He does it in that what you're talking about. You'll see this in his movies, and I just saw it when watching The House, where it's clear they just roll on the one actor or actress, and they just cut in all the different takes that they did, and they worked out perfectly. Because it's like that moment of like running with your bloopers, but then putting them all in the movie. So. All right, we got those are our once a year and never again movies. Now, what about the movie you're going to recommend to anyone? The average movie goer. This is the one movie that you would recommend to anyone, whether it's your parents or the guy you work with or your best friend. And there's also the disclaimer movie, the movie it's like, hey, it could be a good movie,
You have to
but
explain it.
But you should know this before watching it. I think we have the same recommended movie here, which I think is really interesting because I feel like a lot of people don't talk about it that much.
You know, we used to do this show called Action Movie Anatomy, and in that show, there'd be 3 categories of movies at the end. We'd always talk about this, right? There'd be ridiculously legitimate, totally legitimate, and totally ridiculous.
Yep.
We were always the happiest when the middle category got hit because it was some combination of really appealing and like really enjoyable while still with like an air of campy ridiculousness. But there always had to be one really strong component that kind of grounded it.
Right.
And I kind of feel like that now we've done this show for about a month. There's always this middle movie that's like the exact movie. And when we did Ryan Gosling, we established it was Crazy Stupid Love. It's like, it's the movie that anybody can like because it covers all bases. And I think in this case, we both feel the same way about Stranger Than Fiction. It takes advantage of so many things. It takes advantage of Will Ferrell's straight man qualities, his heart, his acting, his ability to play, like his comedy in the movie is really good, but he's not overt. He's a good actor in the movie.
Gyllenhaal's, I think, probably at her best. He's got a great supporting crew with Hoffman and Thompson in
Harvey,
there.
I know these brief backwards.
Queen Latifah's in there. Like, the movie itself is just kind of enjoyable. It's just like a fun, feel-good, rom-com, dramedy, whatever you want to call it. I think you could literally show this movie to anyone. I think the other thing that's interesting about this movie is because you're going to meet people, and it's funny we haven't talked about it till now. With any comedic actor, there's the people you'll meet, they'll go, I just don't like Will Ferrell.
Yeah.
I just don't like
Exactly.
Jim Carrey.
Exactly.
He's just not my cup of tea. This is the movie, I think, if you don't like Gyllenhaal and you don't like Will Ferrell, you could watch it and be like, huh, they're both great in this.
It's like the recommended movie in this category almost ends up being the safest movie is what
Yeah.
it feels like. It's why I think in the Fincher episode, I think my vote was Panic Room because it's the safest, easiest
That's a good
movie
pick,
to
too.
enjoy, right? So it's
Yeah.
like I think that there are other movies that he's done that you can recommend, but they all need some disclaimer or a qualifier like, do you like Man-Child, Will Ferrell? Is this enjoyable for you?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to imagine somebody not liking Stranger Than Fiction. So what's your disclaimer movie that you feel like you have to explain someone before telling them to watch it?
I think, and you kind of teed it off perfectly there with, Will Ferrell is a great actor and he does a really good job dramatically in Stranger Than Fiction. But if you want to see him go for like full drama, no comedy, you've got to watch Everything Must Go.
It's kind of a dark movie.
It is. He just plays like a miserable alcoholic. A woman moves in across the street, played by Rebecca Hall, and they have this somewhat codependent and toxic relationship with one another because I think she's married and he's always gone, or their marriage is on the rocks. And Will Ferrell's kind of like her friend, but he's also a drunk.
Yeah.
And like it, and any real movie that breaks down what alcoholism really is, like there's a really dark side to it. And he does a really good job in this movie. I honestly think it's one of his better performances out there. But I think what's interesting about this is if someone goes, what's a great Will Ferrell movie? I think this movie's pretty good.
Yeah, agreed.
I wouldn't recommend it unless I was like, do you want to see something different? Do you want to see Will Ferrell do something you've never seen him do before? That's what this movie is.
I think the reason it's a disclaimer movie is because it stands above a lot of the others where you would say there's something relevant about this movie, but here's what you'll need to know. And I think that anytime you're in this category, this visibility recommendation category, or sorry, approachability, the movie has to stand out, but it also has to have a caveat. So for me, because when you're talking about it, I remember some of the scenes and Everything Must Go pretty vividly, actually. I remember the scene when he goes to see Laura Dern. And she's written something in his yearbook that he's held on to for years and years and years.
Oh, yeah.
And it's such an awkward, and she's like, why are you here?
Right, because he's so miserable and so lonely that he's holding on to any piece of happiness that he used to have. And it's this weird moment with someone that wrote in his high school yearbook from like 20 plus years ago.
Yeah, and so I think what's great about that movie, but admittedly kind of hard to watch about that movie, is that it's not Leaving Las Vegas. He doesn't die. It doesn't glamorize alcoholism in any kind of... It's not hugely dramatic. It's like a really slow, depressing story. And I wonder, I'm actually curious, because I don't know Will Ferrell's background, what his motivation to take the role was. I wonder if he's struggled with addiction. I wonder if there's been something or someone in his family that connected him to wanting to do that. Because it's a very specific choice. It's one of the only dramatic roles that he's ever taken. It's a pretty heavy one. It's a very, very specific type of character to play.
And he's kind of unlikable in the whole thing. Whereas, like, even in Leaving Las Vegas, when Nic Cage is a piece of shit, you still, like, you either like him or you empathize.
Yeah.
Whereas in Everything Must Go, you're not really supposed to feel for him that much. All right, what's your disclaimer movie?
Dude, this one is going to be my through and through hottest take of the entire day.
And I have your hottest take of the entire show.
Yeah, I have, like, such a strong opinion on this movie. If you say to someone, what's the best Will Ferrell movie? And you're like, what are you going to recommend? Most people are going to recommend this movie, and I don't think you can blindly recommend it. It's Elf. And the reason I say this is because I think Will Ferrell's career has now been built on something else entirely. He doesn't, like Elf is admittedly, this time through when I watched it, I found it funnier than I used to. Some of the stuff is really funny, right? Like, he goes and he sings to James Caan, or like, there's definitely some good stuff in there. But overall, like, my feeling when I watch Elf
eating
is
gum off of the
railing. When I watch Elf, what I find is that I'm like, this doesn't do for me what Will Ferrell became, why he became a global icon, why he became my favorite. Mm-hmm. That's not this movie. This movie is like uncomfortably stupid in my opinion, and some people love it. They grew up watching it, but I didn't watch it growing up. So when I watch this movie now, like, it's just the same way when I watched Mulan 2 years ago, the animated one. I was like, I think I appreciate this, but I don't really like it.
What would your disclaimer be?
If you love all of the movies that I would rank in Will Ferrell's top 5, if you love Step Brothers and the other guys and all the things that I think make him a genius comically, this is going to feel like a child's movie that you're going to turn off halfway through. You have to, like, open your mind to the fact that this is made for kids, and it's, like, definitely a funny movie for children, but the R-rated man-child Will Ferrell that, like, built his whole career, basically, is not what this movie is. Even though it's ranked by most people, it is, I think we said, his highest-rated movie on Tomatoes.
I'm just laughing here because I'm thinking about how every movie that Will Ferrell is in, almost every single one has a moment of him singing.
Yeah.
You know, like always, whether it's Anchorman, whether it's Elf, whether it's Stranger Than Fiction, whether it's, I think, Sherlock or Holmes and Watson, like literally every single movie almost has a moment of him singing in it. He just loves it. I think it's crazy that you would have Elf as your disclaimer movie. I get where you're coming from. It's just a tough sell because it is. I just feel like it's one of those things where the disclaimer would be that you don't like Elf.
The disclaimer would be that you hate children and Christmas. No. I get it. It's a hot take, and I tried to open my mind on this because I have only finished Elf once. It was for this show. I had tried to finish it like 2 or 3 times in my life on airplanes, and it's just never connected for me. And I did think it was funnier this time.
Yeah.
It got me, like, I connected to it way more this time than I had before. It just still doesn't feel like the same brand of movie that I'm used to.
I never really want to watch Elf. I am, like, forced is not the correct word, but every year at Christmas my family turns it on. Yeah. And I watch it once a year, usually, and I don't ever want to watch it otherwise. I think it's fine. I think it's good enough. I get what you're talking about.
Rest in peace, Ed Asner. I mean, there you go. That's what to say about it. I mean, so the last category that we have here, and this was the original visibility category. So it's the idea that if you watch this movie, who are you going to talk about with it? You know, like, is this a movie that's out there? And it's kind of how we qualify when you're ranking best and the worst. It's how we qualify. Like, you can't just pick the deepest, darkest indie movie that you think is great and say it's the best one. There has to be some visibility. So with this one, it's the movie that you probably would have lied about having seen. You know, like, have you seen this? Like, oh, yeah. I saw once along. I was 12 on TV. I used to be on at work all the time. I'd never watched it all the way through, but
I think the movie, for me, that you would have to be embarrassed about not seeing I think it is Zoolander.
Okay.
And that's how the whole thing started off. That's how the show started off, was talking about Zoolander. And I think the reason why is because he wasn't even the most famous person in the movie at the time, but it got a sequel way later on. Will Ferrell is still incredibly famous now. Zoolander is still quoted now. It just feels like the movie that if you're talking about Will Ferrell's career and you're like, have you seen Zoolander? And someone says no to you, it's like shocking and offensive.
It's because weirdly, like, Zoolander is loved by people in very much the same way that Elf is loved by people.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm trying to think how to qualify it. I think we're dudes, so there were certain movies when we were teenagers that teenage dudes loved. We all quoted. Like, you think about even just like the premise of Wedding Crashers. It's an appealing movie as dudes, old school, very appealing. It's a bunch of guys, right?
Yeah, frat bros.
Yeah, but you think about, like, I can think in my life of like girls I've known whose favorite movie is Zoolander, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah,
like it's same with Elf. Like, they're very well liked movies by people that aren't just broed out guys.
And that's something that he was able to lean into for a long time. And I think, again, it's like a PG-13 movie. It's got, Owen Wilson, Ben Stiller, and Will Ferrell in it. So it covers a lot of different demographics of a lot of different movie fans out there. And, it's been 20 years. So why not?
I think the one I'm going to go with has got to be, it's just got to be the OG sort of like Will Ferrell's like standard movie, and it's Anchorman.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine a world in which like that movie comes up and someone says they haven't. I remember. We played the movie Trivia Schmodown, and I remember like this last season, John Flickinger, one of his questions in the last round, I think it was his 3-pointer, was like, in what film will you find the quote, "It's so hot, milk was a bad choice."
Yeah.
And he didn't know it. And I remember like everybody watching the chat, everybody talking afterwards was like, how can someone not know that quote?
Yeah,
right?
That's crazy.
Because it's
seems crazy
because
to
it
me.
seems like if you were going to say to me like, hey, what's the Will Ferrell movie you expect everyone has seen? It's literally Elf or Anchorman. They're like the two movies in my mind that I feel like everyone has seen.
Yeah, I think so. And I think Anchorman is, I wouldn't want to admit not seeing it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to admit not seeing Zoolander either. What's funny about that is for the movie the Oh Yeah movie, the one that you forget exists, you're like, oh yeah, that movie came out.
That was a thing.
It's Anchorman 2 for me.
Oh yeah, like just came.
It just came and went. It's actually pretty high reviewed, as we talked about it before. I've never wanted to watch it again. I've never heard no one's ever talked to me about Anchorman 2. Ever.
Yeah.
I think you and I talking about it today is the most I've ever talked about it, other than maybe the day that I watched it or that it came out.
It's got some funny stuff for sure.
Yeah.
When he's at SeaWorld and he talks about sexually assaulting a starfish.
Okay.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff with like James Marsden and like Harrison Ford.
Yeah, Marsden's great.
There's a lot of funny stuff in that movie.
For sure. But like, I forgot basically all of those moments.
We literally just said there's an argument that Anchorman is his most unmissable movie. Mm-hmm. The sequel that was supposed to be like just
We've been waiting forever for it.
It like almost feels like it didn't happen. Like it never gets
same
discussed.
with Zoolander 2.
Ever. Yeah.
Right? Like both of them. Both those sequels feel like we waited forever and we were both let down by them.
Yeah, so that movie. And this one's insane because you and I were talking about this literally earlier in the show. In 2012, he co-starred in a movie with Zach Galifianakis.
Oh, yeah.
The Campaign. I think this movie is directed by Jay Roach. It might be directed by McKay, but I think it's Jay Roach.
I think Roach sounds correct.
And I saw this in theaters. I remember my ex-girlfriend, my old roommate Jeff Burns, and his ex-girlfriend.
Right.
The four of us went to go see this movie together.
Sweet.
It was weird. And they broke up like the next week, I remember. It was like they were breaking up and we were seeing The Campaign together on like a date night.
Sounds like a blast.
It was strange. But like I just remember watching this movie and like it's kind of funny. It's not.
Yeah, of course it is.
It's definitely not bad. But like for a movie that this is peak Galifianakis. This was supposed to be one of the movies that kept him on the map in a major way. And honest to God, if you played that movie game where it's like name movies until you forget, an actor's been in.
This would be your ace in the hole.
I feel like half the people you play with forget this movie ever happened.
Right.
They would just never remember.
Just be the one you hold on to the very end. You say The Campaign, and they're like, all right, I'm done. That's it. That's all I got. Okay, I like that. I honestly totally forgot The Campaign existed. I've seen it, I think, once. I don't remember any funny moments from it, really. But yeah, so guys, now that you've heard the arguments, what do you think? What do you think is going to be the best and the worst. Like we said before, screenshot it, hit us up on Twitter, hit us up on Instagram, let us know in the comments. We love to get involved with the conversation with you guys. We love to hear your guys' thoughts, and honestly, it really helps us kind of shape the episodes. Every single time we hear from one of you guys, it lets us know what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, or if we're completely off base. So now we get into it, the best and the worst of Will Ferrell. Let's start. Go ahead.
I want to ask you a question before we do the final ranking. I thought about this because of all the funny scenes we've talked about. He has some of the most memorable scenes in history. What is your single Will Ferrell fist bump moment? Could be in a movie, could be a sketch.
My favorite Will Ferrell fist pump moment.
I got to think about mine too. Like I was thinking while we were talking, I was like, there are a few that I mean,
still to this day, just kill you.
Oh my God. Like because I think I'll go with this one. This may not be it, but if it's not it, it's damn close. The party scene in Old School when he takes the dart in his neck.
Yes.
You got a fucking dart in your neck. When he takes the dart. You're crazy. You're crazy, man. He takes the dart in his neck and he's lumbering and he like throws the kid out of the way and he falls on the ground and it shows him and he's like, "Aah." Like, I've probably watched that scene 50 times, and, like, anytime it long enough goes that I haven't watched it and I cue it back up, I will piss myself laughing.
Oh my God, I did. Is this bad? Is this bad?
You should pull that out. That shit is not cool. Wait. Pull what out? The dart, man. Got a fucking dart in your neck. You're crazy, man.
I mean, it's funny because I think mine might also be from Old School, but at the end, when they're doing like the decathlon or whatever, the academic thing, and it's the combination of getting set on fire as the mascot and then going in the locker room and freaking out in his underwear with the trash can. We gotta keep it together! We gotta keep our composure! Like,
it's so good.
It's funny because we didn't actually really talk about Old School that much, but like, even when I think back to the You're My Boy Blue, like,
oh my God,
everything about him in that movie was so
Jeremy
perfectly
Piven,
hilarious.
That movie's incredible.
The other thing I think would just be like in Step Brothers, his moments, his awkward goodbyes with Richard Jenkins. Every time, it just absolutely slays me. When he plays awkward in that movie, every single moment of him, whether it's the handshake and the hug, whether it's talking about his therapist who he's in love with, like all those things, he's so good.
Yeah, there's so many, but yeah, I think those are pretty strong. I'd love to know what you guys think. Is there a single Will Ferrell career moment that stands out as your absolute fist pump? Leave it in the comments below or tweet at us about it. That's what I want to know. Let's get into the best and the worst. Start with the worst.
Yeah, let's start with the worst. Let's start with not the worst of the worst, but we'll do a 3, 2, 1 here. And so I guess we'll start with the best of the worst. Land of the Lost is going to be our number 3 here. And I think the reason for this is there was 3 movies that we were talking about to kind of take this spot. And it was The House, Land of the Lost, and Bewitched. And I watched all 3 of them in the last 24 hours.
Impressive.
It's been really enjoyable.
Impressive.
And what I have to say is, with Bewitched, it feels like they're trying a little harder. It feels like, I think in general, Ferrell's character just isn't that likable. Nicole Kidman's in that movie, which feels like such a weird, like, the chemistry's a little off.
It's also like 05 Kidman. She won her Oscar in 03. So like, I mean, she's like prime time Nicole Kidman.
She's a superstar.
Yeah.
And it's clear that she is supposed to be the superstar of this movie. But it's just like fine. And you know, there's some parts of it that are kind of sweet. There's some of the writing in it that's good enough. And then with the other one, The House, what I found is I watched The House last night and I watched Land of the Lost today. I actually laughed out loud during The House a couple times.
Because Mantzoukas is funny, right?
Yeah, Mantzoukas is funny, and also like when Ferrell accidentally cuts off the dude's finger, and it's like pretty hilarious.
Isn't correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that the one where Jeremy Renner's in it?
Yeah, Jeremy Renner comes in and Ferrell cuts off his arm at one point. Like, there's just this part where Ferrell and Poehler and Jason Mantzoukas just go on like this crazy tear of being like almost like gang lords.
Yeah.
And it's like kind of funny. It's mostly stupid, but I did laugh. Like,
Yeah.
It actually did make me laugh a few times. Whereas Land of the Lost just like didn't really, and it's him and McBride, which I I feel like on paper, especially when you think about
Yeah.
Eastbound and Down, like it's such a great combination.
Is it also Rebecca Hall again? Am I making that up?
I don't think it's Rebecca Hall.
Okay.
I can't remember. It's another actress of that ilk for that time, though.
My old roommate, Jeff Burns, who I mentioned just a second ago, loved Land of the Lost for some reason.
Really?
He used to watch it a lot, so it would be on, and he just thought it was funny, so he would play it a lot, and I would watch it, like parts of it with him at times, and I'd be like, this movie isn't good. Like, why do you like this so much?
Yeah, and it's like, you know, when we talk about expectation versus execution, I can understand throwing Bewitched or The House in there because one's Poehler and Ferrell, and the other one's Nicole Kidman and Will Ferrell, but like, just at the end of the day, I think Land of the Lost is just a little bit worse than both of those movies. At number 2, here, the second to worst.
Second to worst. We talked about it earlier. Expectation, execution on this one's a big deal because this is prime time Kevin Hart. You got Get Hard, and I think the problem with Get Hard is like I watched this on an airplane, as I seem to watch all of these on airplanes, and I remember thinking, there's no way this movie is gonna like not make me laugh. Like both these guys are so funny that there has to be 40% of this that I'll get laughs out of. And I remember when it ended, just being like, God, I feel like I laughed at 2 scenes.
Well, I think the whole movie is comprised of about 50% rape jokes in prison, and the other 50% is about Will Ferrell trying to be black when he's white.
Race jokes.
Race jokes. And it's like, that's what I'm talking about with like lowbrow humor. There's a way to allude to those things in a way that is funny, but I still don't even think you could talk about those 2 things for an hour and a half and that movie still be good. It just doesn't work for me. And I think Get Hard, like we said, there's that scene where Kevin Hart's playing like all these different people in the yard is pretty funny, right? But like in general, I think it's just kind of like cheap, kind of lazy humor, and they were just relying on the fact that these 2 superstars would just be fun to look at for an hour and a half.
Yeah, I mean, because the premise of the movie when you're selling it is like a fine elevator pitch, like it kind of works. But there's something, this is like so unrelated, but I know you're going to think this is funny. I looked up this interview the other day that I did with Dennis Haysbert and Mike Coulter. It's like 2 or 3 years ago. And I have no idea why I did this, but I sit down and I look at them and I go, nice to see you guys today. You're both looking very fly.
No, you said that.
I'm not sure why.
Right.
They were very well dressed. I was just trying to compliment them. And they like, neither of them like responded like in a bad way, but I like watched it back and I was like, why did I say that? That's like, I was like, that's like uncomfortable.
It's like Adam Scott in Step Brothers.
I was like,
you got a really dope front lawn here. You and your homies can hang out.
I was like, what is this? Anyway, it just made me laugh, and I was like, God, that was like
proud of you, man.
Unintentional moment, yeah. But yes, Get Hard, definitely not very funny. I remember Craig T. Nelson shitting on him is pretty funny.
Yeah,
that's one of the parts that I think I laughed at the most.
He keeps calling him daddy.
Yeah,
because he didn't have a father. And then I think the reason why our worst of the worst is Holmes and Watson is strictly because of expectation versus execution. It's the 3rd time you get John C. Reilly and Will Ferrell together. It seems like a good enough property where they could have fun with it. We all became pretty familiarized with Sherlock Holmes, whether it was through, the show Holmes or whether it was through Robert Downey Jr. doing it. This movie, though, is just bad. We talked about it a lot earlier on. It's just not funny.
I'll tell you one really bizarre thing about this, too. So they make Sherlock Holmes in 2009 with Downey and Jude Law. And then they make the sequel either 2 or 3 years later. It's like 2011 or something, 2012. They made both this and Sherlock Gnomes the same year. And it's like 7 years after a sequel. It's almost a decade after they had like reinvigorated this franchise. Makes you think that probably the script for this movie and the idea for this movie was probably on the table years earlier. And I'll bet you it just kept getting pushed for some reason.
Right. And
then ended up getting made way later. Because I'll bet you if Holmes and Watson gets made in like 2014... I'll bet you it's a lot funnier.
Probably.
Because I think a lot of the jokes, first of all, are probably more relevant because we've all watched these movies recently. So it's like they're directly poking fun. And also these guys are a little bit more in their prime comically. Like, this came out at such a weird time. Like, no one was looking for a Sherlock Holmes comedy in 2018.
No, it just felt weird and out of place. And again, just not that funny. When you talk about wasting talent, not only were John C. Reilly and Will Ferrell not great, but like Rebecca Hall and Ralph Fiennes could have been anyone in the world.
Yeah.
They did not bring anything to it, whereas like I think if you really leaned into either of their acting abilities, it could have been so much better. So worst of the worst is Holmes and Watson. Then we have Get Hard, then Land of the Lost for our bottom 1, 2, 3. Now let's get into the good stuff. the best of Will Ferrell?
Fun piece of trivia before we move on from Holmes and Watson. Our friend Ethan Irwin talked about this in one of the Schmodown matches recently. They wanted Ralph Fiennes originally for their Moriarty in the actual Sherlock Holmes. So when they saw this get made and he plays Moriarty in the comedy, he was like, come on, really? I thought that was pretty hilarious.
That is pretty hilarious. Pretty good pull there for what Jared Harris, I think is who ended up being it. So there we go. Number 3 of the best. We're going to count down 3 to 1 here from number 3 up to number 1 is Stranger Than Fiction. It's our first one here. And this is an interesting one because there was a couple movies that could have been in place of Stranger Than Fiction, but I think what we talked about with it being the most approachable movie probably in his entire catalog, the fact that it's enjoyable, it's a fun little rom-com, it's him doing something a little bit different, but also doing something that we're familiar with. It just feels like a really great movie that I love. I love Stranger Than Fiction.
Yeah, I think it's really fantastic. It's super approachable. It occupies a space that almost no other movie in his entire career does. This, of the 4 episodes of the show we have now recorded, was the hardest top 3 to come up with because I actually think his top 6 is totally bananas. Like top 7 even. Like the 6th and 7th movies that we have to leave off are crazy iconic. So Stranger Than Fiction was a tough fight at 3. The other guys just narrowly misses the spot for me, which I'm sorry guys, I tried to fight for it. I tried to physically fight Drew and he wouldn't let it happen.
He did try to physically fight me, and it's crazy because I think what it actually came down to was the fact that like I started to love the other guys more because of you and because of rewatching it. Whereas Stranger Than Fiction, just right out of the gate, if I watched it by myself and never spoke to anyone else, I'd be like, that movie was really enjoyable. Yeah. Whereas the other guys, the quotability and on the rewatchability really made it go up. I think, honestly, I like watching the other guys more. I just think that Stranger Than Fiction is a better movie overall.
Yeah, and I think also like you got to use all the factors. The reason we have the factors, the proof is in the pudding there that we both would recommend Stranger Than Fiction as our number 1 recommended movie. You have to pay attention to that. It does have to give it a lot of credit here. Number 2 on the list, one of the most iconic comedies of all time. You have Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy. I think probably a film that would be number 1 for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think honestly maybe one of the reasons why it's not number 1 is because it's older. Maybe it got kind of burnt out in our minds.
Yeah.
Because before there were memes, before there was like this great encyclopedia of memes that came out new every single day, we literally just used to sit around. I think I've even seen a meme about this that said before memes, dudes used to just sit in a room and quote Anchorman to each other, which is literally what everyone did. Everyone quoted Anchorman. Didn't matter what it was. 60% of the time, it works every time. Like, every single line.
I want to be on you.
Yeah, right? Like, this apartment smells of rich mahogany. I'm not even angry. I'm just impressed. Like, we could sit here and do this for an hour and just list every line from Anchorman that is iconic. I think part of the reason why it's a number 2 is that, like I said, maybe we got a little burnt out. I think that the sequel ends up kind of tarnishing the legacy of Anchorman.
Their menstrual cycle attracts bears.
It's so dumb. I love Lamp.
Yeah.
Like, the movie is so quotable. It's definitely, I think, his most quotable film he's ever done.
Yeah.
But it does feel like it's of the generation that it came out. And like I said, you and I have heard this movie recited by every single person we know for almost 20 years.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of the irreplaceable comedy. His single most iconic comedy, absolutely.
Yes.
One story about Anchorman, I think we've talked about it on here before, but I really love this, is that the war film Lone Survivor that we like so much, Peter Berg directed, and it's a great movie. If you guys haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. They talk about Marco Cottrell, who is the lone survivor. He talks about when they're in this big fight, this big battle, and they're on the hill. He and the other guys, the soldiers, they had just watched Anchorman the week before. And so they're all in these crazy situations, hiding behind rocks with rifles getting shot at and taking bullets in their body. And they're like quoting and laughing about quotes from Anchorman during this battle. Because it's this, it's this unifying movie. Like, even those guys, it's such a quotable, enjoyable, funny experience. I thought that was a great piece of the story when I read that.
And it speaks directly to what we're talking about, which is that this movie was universally watched and adored by everyone out there at the time. Everyone could talk about it. You could say any quote from it and someone would laugh in the room. The reason it's not our number 1 or other things that we spoke on, our number 1 movie is Step Brothers.
And I know this is crazy, guys, because
where's old school?
We realize old school's not there. I mean, I know you can make arguments for Talladega Nights. Where's Elf? Like, these are all great movies. Like, they really are. Zoolander. But at the end of the day, I think my point about the other guys feeling like it's just joke after joke after joke, and it's like an endless string of hilarious jokes. I feel that way about it now because I've seen it so many times. I think the intelligence of the jokes in that movie are pretty high. Step Brothers is like that, but you don't have to try as hard.
You don't.
They're just funny out every single time. Nobody thinks that movie isn't hilarious.
I think what's crazy about Step Brothers is you can turn on any, I think, 5-minute segment in that movie and you will laugh out loud. And I think at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to, is like Will Ferrell making you laugh, and he does all of the things that you expect him to do here, right? He's angry, he's over the top, he's weak, he cries, he sings, he does his physical comedy, he gets to play off of John C. Reilly. Like, literally everything that you could want out of Will Ferrell, you kind of get from this movie. You even get him dressing up as like a dead guy when they're trying to stop their brother from selling the house. Like, there's so many things that Adam McKay was able to go like, what is everything that Will Ferrell does perfectly? And let's take it all and put it in one movie.
Why are you so sweaty? I was watching Cops.
And then like again, like you talk about the intelligence behind it. You don't even know there's going to be a callback to, and I know the Cops doesn't start till 4. It's like, why is that hilarious? But it's absolutely hilarious.
One of my scenes about this from this movie that I think is so funny. I think it popped up on like maybe TikTok the other day or something. I hadn't thought about it in a while.
Alive, Brennan.
That's so good. When they're at the dinner table and she's like, "It's not your fault," and he's like, "It is his fault. It is your fault," and he starts crying.
Yeah,
like it's just a bit. Jenkins is just. He's just like batting 1,000 in this movie. Everything he does.
There's the part where Mary Steenburgen goes, I've never seen you laugh like that. And then it cuts to Jenkins and he has this like adoring look at Adam Scott. He doesn't even say a word, but it's just hilarious.
You know what really gets my dick hard?
Help my friends out. Making 4/5 commish. So Step Brothers, and I think the other part of it too is exactly what you're saying, is Jenkins, Mary, Catherine Hahn, Adam Scott, they're all hilarious.
Yeah.
They all are individually hilarious without Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly.
I heard you struck Derek. I like. Oh, sorry. Now I just remembered when I asked you about what is the funniest scene in a Will Ferrell movie.
Yeah.
The fist pump moment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there is a single funnier scene in any movie than the Sweet Child of Mine a cappella car sing-along.
I know. Well, I wanted to say it, but it's not him.
Yeah.
But literally, me and my old roommates used to just watch that scene
Yeah.
like a couple times a week. You would just hear, out of my roommate Jeremy's room, and we'd all run in there and just laugh our asses off for like 2 minutes.
It's one of the single most like inventive
flat.
comedy scenes.
So flat.
Yeah, I'm Derek and I can sing high. It's so good.
It's just so stupid. So, guys, that's our best. Step Brothers, number 1. Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy at 2. And Stranger Than Fiction at 3. And our 3 worst, from the worst of the worst, is Holmes and Watson. Then Get Hard's a little bit better. And then Land of the Lost, I guess, is just a little bit better than that. Let us know what you guys think about the best and the worst. Did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? What are your best and worst from Will Ferrell? The last thing we do before we got to get out of here is what is next for Will Ferrell? Because we didn't even talk about Eurovision, right?
Yeah,
we kind of talked about the other things that he did in the 2010s because we had to. We didn't talk about Casa de Mi Padre, which was also a little interesting. Like, why are you doing this movie? But what does Will Ferrell do now? What do we want out of Will Ferrell? Because it definitely feels like his star is not gone, but it's definitely dimmed a bit.
I think he still has the credibility that if like you got a 4th pairing of him and John C. directed by Adam McKay and it was a good concept.
Oh God.
I think we'd all probably be excited. I think he's an actor with enough credibility that it's like if he showed up in the right script or the right kind of project, I think we'd all be excited because you root for Will Ferrell. You know, it's like
you love him.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's funny at the end of the show I'm saying this, but when I got into hosting, I made a list of 10 people I wanted to interview. That was going to be like my dream interviews, you know? And Will Ferrell was on my list. And so a few years back, I got to do a quick interview with him. And when I met him, he was just the best. Like, he was just everything that I wanted him to be. I got a laugh out of him. He was so good-natured. He took his time. And I think, you know, he's one of those guys that I believe that experience I had is probably one that almost everybody who's ever worked with him has had.
Yeah.
Everyone I know who's worked with him has said the same thing. And so I feel like if he showed up in the right thing, we would all root for him. I don't think he's a guy who's lost his cred. I just think that he hasn't been in the right project in a while. So I would say probably going back to working with McKay would be a really smart move. If he could find the right comedy to do with Adam McKay, I think that'd be a good move.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I think another role that would be really good is like, if you guys have seen The World's Greatest Dad, or if you've seen Another Round, I think the idea of him playing like a teacher that maybe has a drinking problem or something like that, to where we can get some drama out of him. We can get him around maybe some up and coming stars, but then he can also have the moments of heart where he's like talking to them about his life, or the moments of really connecting with us as like Will Ferrell the human being as opposed to Will Ferrell the performer.
Are you thinking like Woody Harrelson in Edge of 17 kind
exactly,
of a role?
Exactly. I mean, I think even Bernthal has a good one in, God, I can't remember what movie it is now, but like I want to see him as like that guy. It's like a high school teacher or college professor that is struggling with his life, but the kids love him, like that type of thing, because I think it'd be good to see more drama out of Will Ferrell. When we have seen drama out of him, he's done a good job, and I think that the over-the-top comedy thing is just getting a little old and a little tired, and I would love to see him work with McKay and Riley again, but I would be way more excited to see him in like a coming-of-age dramedy where he wasn't the star.
I mean, that role, the Thomas Hayden Church and Easy A, the Woody Harrelson, I think, is it Me and Earl and the Dying Girl? Is that the one?
Maybe that's the one with
Bernthal. That role, though, is a really good role. If you could find the right balance where he's not in it too much, but he's just right, I could see that working really well. I think there's kind of a Robin Williams in the second half of his career space.
Imagine if he had that Good Will Hunting role that Williams did. Like, imagine if that happened.
It would be awesome. And I believe now, especially because I feel like he's taken a bit of time away from his classic comedy stuff. I mean, I guess Eurovision was recent, but I think that would be a direction he could go. And then the last thing for me is, like, if you go back and you look at a lot of the funniest stuff that Will Ferrell ever did, we mentioned it earlier, his guest stars, his cameos, his digital shorts.
Yeah.
You look at like his bloopers from Eastbound and Down, or you go look at like all the like digital shorts playing George Bush, like that type of the Funny or Die stuff. Like The Landlord was this famous thing from way back when. That type of stuff was really successful, and I can imagine Will Ferrell continuing to do more stuff like that. And that to me is like, don't ever get away from being innovative and creative, because I think that's some of the stuff he's best at.
Yeah, and maybe it could spawn into something new, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe he could have his Ted Lasso moment from a weird character that he played in something, right?
Totally.
So guys, that's going to do it for the best and the worst of Will Ferrell. The absolute best is Step Brothers. The absolute worst was Holmes and Watson. And a big part of us being able to do this show every single week are the incredible ratings and reviews that we've been getting from you guys, especially over here on iTunes. We said we're going to shout out anyone that left us a review, whether they were good or bad. So Button T and DDur12, thank you guys so much for your 5-star reviews. Big time salute to you guys. And of course, our generals. The generals, if you guys like what we're doing, you can check us out on patreon.com/teamaction. This is a very special group of people to us.
It is a special group of people, and we're going to read their names here in just one quick second. I wanted to give a quick shout out on this episode because we are about 1 month out from me actually hitting the road, going on tour.
Oh, hell yeah.
I'm going to be going on tour. I'm going around the country. I've got 11 shows, including 2 in LA. Denver, Austin, Orlando is the first block. A couple of those shows, Austin's almost sold out. So get your tickets. It's benbateman2021tour.com. If you guys didn't know I played music, you can find me on Spotify, Apple, all the different places. And I'd love to see you. All the shows are going to be kind of like one-on-one meet and greet hangouts, small, I'm just renting private spaces and hanging out with you guys. So if you want to check it out, go grab yourself a ticket. I'd love to see you guys on the road. And otherwise, we're going to shout out our generals right now. Thank you guys so much for listening, and thanks for watching another episode of The Best and the Worst. We'll see you next week for Denzel Washington.
Denzel next week. All right, a big time shout out to our generals in our Patreon. Patreon.com/teamaction is the best way to support us in what we're doing. And this is also a great place to get in on the conversation. Before we tape these episodes, we talk to our generals in the Action Army about their ideas of what makes a great martial artist, what makes a great Ryan Gosling film, and next week, what makes the best or the worst David Fincher film. And we'll start with Call Sign Kilmer, Quiz Show, Ripper, Demon King, Excalibur, Caddyshack, The Chosen One, Public Enemy #1, Kaiju, ACP, Freedom, Robin, Kimura, Moses, Galactus, Bartab, Party J, Congo, The Gray, Phantom, Deja Vu,
24601. Call sign hashtag Ladies Night, Ladies Man, JFTB, Wonderland, Quinn, Brosnan, Desperado, Outback, Da Vinci, The Slap, Entrapment, Stamos, Dante's Peak, Director, Top Gun, and Gundam, plus all of our past generals. A big time salute to you guys, and thank you so much for supporting the best and the worst. See you guys next week.